Here's a second thought video that sounded interesting to me. Do socialists just want to take your stuff? Now, this is a question that a lot of anti-socialist people have because on the surface, at least, it can appear as though that's happening in some cases. So let's see what Second Thought has to say about it.
Socialism is great until you run out of other people's money. Socialists just want everything given to them for free. Socialists want to take your stuff. How many times have you heard all these claims?
A lot. As someone who lives in a capitalist nation, the United States, who, the vast majority of people, period, like on the internet, in most places are at the very least, liberal, but mostly center-right adjacent, if not outright right-wing. So yes, I've heard that sentiment a lot.
Probably a lot. While it can be frustrating to have to debunk these misguided arguments over and over again, when we're all on the same page about our goals for the future, we can actually have a productive conversation. So, why do some people think that socialists want to take your stuff?
It's a good place to start. I was going to say, I hope he starts by articulating what the opposing arguments are, and then break them down.
This claim likely stems from a line in the Communist Manifesto, in which Marx writes, "In this sense, the theory of the communist may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property."
Okay, yeah. So, from what I understand, under communism, under some forms of socialism, there is no private property, i.e. property that you own that you use to extract profit. Now, you can have personal property, i.e. things that you own and use for yourself, but using something to try and extract profit from someone else, that is what communists and many socialists tend to be against, from what I understand.
The outrage produced by this line is simply the result of a misunderstanding of the concept of private property. A lot of people hear the term private property and think
personal
like
property.
My toothbrush, or my guitar, or my life-size Snorlax plush. And while their confusion is understandable, that's not what socialists mean by private property. Your toothbrush and all your other belongings are considered personal property.
Yeah, that's the distinction I've heard in like leftist circles and just like watching Hassan a lot. You know what I mean?
Think of it as stuff you own, occupy, or otherwise use on a daily basis. Your clothes, your car, your furniture, even big things like your house, if you've paid it off, of course.
But you can't own, in theory, in communist theory, I think, I couldn't own another house and charge you rent to live in it. That's what communists are against. But what you would get under communism or socialism is your own house. So it's not that we're like under capitalism, more or less, you're being denied the house. It's the capitalist system that's taking something from you, i.e. a house. Whereas under socialism or communism in this case, the house is given to you. There's no one there to profit off of your ability to have shelter, which is insane to me. But that's what I understand it to be.
That personal stuff, his pocket watch, his top hat, his car, a Ford, of course, all of these things would still be his in a socialist society, because he actually personally uses them. The only thing that would be taken from him, and there's some nuance to this, we'll get to that, would be his car factories.
And on the surface, I can understand why that would be scary to a lot of people. In a capitalist system, and I'm leftists, socialists would say I'm mischaracterizing what probably really happens, but I'm saying this from a conservative capitalist perspective. From their perspective, he started the company, he invested his own money, maybe he had an idea, and that idea became, what would eventually become those factories that people would work in. So while he had the idea, maybe he did the investment, shouldn't he extract some amount of profit from that? And a part of me empathizes with that, for sure. But at some point, too much is too much. And even from a SOCDEM perspective, we should tax them a lot to pay for, good things for your society. If not going the socialist, having the employees own the means of production angle. Before we even get there, I think there's plenty we can do in terms of like taxation. But that's kind of the argument here.
Stuff he owns in name, but is run by workers. Alright, with these definitions and a real-life example, you should now have a pretty good grasp on what the distinction is between personal and private property. You and 10 of your friends are working on a farm. Every day you get up, tend the fields, feed the animals, maintain the equipment, and so on. Without your labor, the farm would not produce anything. Now imagine that once a month, some fancy city slicker comes to stand in the field and watch y'all work for 20 minutes. And then he goes away again. In this scenario, who is producing value? It doesn't seem right that the guy who's never there, who never picks up a shovel or plants a single seed, has complete control of the farm and pockets all the profits himself. When socialists say they want to seize the means of production, it's not that they want to take the farm from the city slicker, they want to give the farm to the farmers, to the people who actually do the work. No one is entitled to the value generated by others, which, ironically, is how people swindled by capitalist propaganda see socialism. They think, oh, those socialists are just lazy and want to benefit from the hard work of others. That couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, in this particular example, the way he's framing it, it's the person who owns that farm that is actually benefiting from the hard work of others, and it is a compelling argument. I think it works neatly in this farm argument. I think there's more nuanced conversations to be had over, this worker-boss relationship. But in this case, yeah, he presents a compelling argument for why workers should have, at the very least, more say into their pay, working conditions, etc., if not complete say.
Socialists recognize who's doing the hard work, and they want to return the fruits of that labor to those people. It's as simple as that. Now, as always happens with topics where you're starting from square one, I'm sure this explanation has brought up even more questions. But I hope that so far I've been able to articulate the philosophy of socialism. The means of production should be held in common, not hoarded by people who simply have the money to hold the piece of paper which says they own the property.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. That makes sense to me, as like someone who doesn't currently fully identify as a socialist. What he just described there does sound better than what we have now. So yeah, that sounds good.
Let's quickly tackle one more common question about ownership of private property before looking at the real threat to your personal property. One of the most common questions a socialist will get from a curious layperson is, what about small business owners? What happens to my dad's pizza place? And once again, good question. It's hard to give a blanket answer to things like this for a number of reasons.
That's kind of what I mean. Like, it works in that farm example where it is like 10 workers. There's one guy who just owns the farm and just doesn't do anything but extract profit. Like, it neatly works with that example. But let's get into, I hope he gets into maybe some more complex nuances of how this might look. You know what I mean?
One of them being that socialism is a process. The end goal of a stateless, classless, moneyless society is a long way off, and there will be many phases along the way. But to give you a general answer that I hope is at least somewhat useful, if your dad pays his employees fairly, if he's not exploiting their labor for greater profits, if he operates just one restaurant in your community, and if he does some of the work himself, he's probably fine for now. Would it be better if the employees received the full value of their labor and had democratic control of their workplace? Absolutely. If that were the case, they might even choose to democratically elect the former owner as the operations leader of the team.
Okay.
There are all sorts of
That
answers
makes sense.
to this question.
Would they elect to have the same salary, or would some people have more salaries? I think this is, he talks about stages of socialism. Marx, I believe, wrote about stages of socialism. This is something I've heard leftists talk about a lot. But yeah, maybe at an earlier stage of socialism, you could have, a disparate amount of pay. But late stage socialism or communism, I believe that is out of the question, and everyone gets paid the exact same amount. While there is resource scarcity, I'm not 100% sure that it should be like 100% even. Like if you're working harder or doing harder work or doing work that is more like requires you to go to school for longer or have more specialized understanding of something, or maybe you took a risk or something, I don't know. You should be rewarded while there is resource scarcity. But if we achieve a perfect society with no resource scarcity or very little of it, we can definitely move something a lot closer to that. But that's my perspective on this currently. I'm still obviously learning a lot. But yeah.
Question. But generally speaking, what socialists believe should happen is that workers should have a say in their work. And
yeah, I want that. I like all of what I just said aside, I want that. Workers in all companies at all levels deserve more say into their pay and working conditions. I do believe that fundamentally.
Over the last several decades, as labor protections have been rolled back, unions have been gutted, and rampant privatization has consumed more and more of our reality, conditions for the average worker have worsened. Wages are stagnant at best, and not even close to keeping up with inflation.
Wages for you and me are stagnant at best. The rich are getting way the fuck richer. For sure.
For example, if the federal minimum wage had just kept up with inflation and productivity gains over that period, it would be over $24 an hour right now. It's currently $7.25, just over a quarter of what it should be. But
Jesus
wages aren't the only
Christ,
issue.
dude.
The cost of living has
That's so
skyrocketed.
depressing, man.
Everything from food to healthcare to education, your car, your house, your cell phone. For more and more people, you don't own those things at all. The bank does. And if you make one wrong move, if your boss decides you're redundant and lets you go and you can't pay your installment, those things will be taken from you, leaving you destitute and without a safety net.
Yeah. None of that's good. None of that, as I often put it, is a sign of a healthy socioeconomic system, in my opinion. Like, I don't know how you can hear that, like, this is the way things are. What he just described. Wages are terrible. How can you hear these things and think this is evidence of a healthy socioeconomic system? And I assure you, conservative who is statistically watching this, because that's mostly who watches my videos, I promise you it's not because we have too much socialism or even too much regulation. It's not. It's because we're letting capitalism reach its logical conclusions. That's what's happening.
Under capitalism, there's no such thing as workplace democracy. The city slicker owns the farm. If you step out of line, you're gone, replaced with another desperate cog ready to be plugged into the machine.
Desperate's the word here.
And since you do not have access to the means of production, the only thing you have to bargain with is your labor. Either you sell that labor to a capitalist firm in exchange for a meager wage, or you starve. There is no freedom in this arrangement.
Yeah. That's not good, dude. I fundamentally believe that is not a healthy relationship between the worker and, like, the boss. Like, more so the worker and their labor. A healthy relationship between workers and their labor. That is not... The way capitalism handles that relationship is not healthy, in my opinion.
The entire capitalist system is built on coercion.
Yeah.
But capitalism...
Sure. That's an interesting point.
And while there's so much more to talk about, this video was nominally about answering the question of whether socialists want to take your stuff. I hope it's clear by now that we do not. In fact, we want to empower you to have more control over your stuff, including the most important things, your work and your livelihood. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this week's episode. I'll probably do a series on these common objections to socialism, so be sure to stick around if you'd like to see those videos. If you've got friends or family who have these concerns, send them this video. I hope they find it useful too.
I will. No, this was really good. I think he answered the question really well. He framed it in, good ways. And he asked the question from his opponent's perspective, and then he broke down the answers. And so no, this was really good. I would highly recommend this one for sure.